So what does this mean for the West, of course, the dictators in the West who rely on the resources that they were getting from the dictators in the Mideast?
Well, I think the interesting thing is to see how, if you look at a place like Egypt right now, we're seeing the revolution is continuing in this sort of struggle between the old order of the remnants of the Mubarak regime who are still in power versus the current versus the new forces that are being unleashed by the revolution. And I think one of the key issues that is being fought over is the issue of the loan from the IMF to Egypt. There's a lot of back and forth between the IMF and different members of the Egyptian government about whether those loans are going to take place or not, and whether they're going to be provided at low interest rates or not, and what sort of conditionality is attached with them. A lot of talk about it, but so far yet the Egyptian government has not officially taken on those loans. What's happening is that the rating of the Egyptian government is being downgraded by rating agencies, and the borrowing costs of the Egyptian government are getting very high. So people now are expecting a fiscal or possibly a monetary crisis in Egypt, which is, obviously going to be a very bad thing. The unfortunate thing is that this is being used as a justification for rushing through the IMF loan and for getting into even more debt, rather than people looking at it logically and saying, this road of spending and borrowing has brought us to the brink of disaster, and we should just quit this idea of continuing to think that we could borrow from outside in order to build our country. It has not worked for 30 years almost in which Mubarak has been in power. It has only served to enrich Mubarak and his cronies, and it has not brought development to the country. All that it has done is increase the indebtedness of the country and make people liable for paying more and more and more of their income towards taxes to go towards paying off interest on debt. And I think Egypt needs to make a clean break with the past, with these policies of the Mubarak era, from the respect of, particularly by making a statement on the debt. I think the foreign debt should be basically repudiated, and Mubarak should be made liable for it. And with domestic debt, they need to reach a sort of agreement with the domestic creditors that saves the banking system and prevents it from a collapse by recapitalizing the banks in case they have a problem with liquidity because of the treasuries. And then after that, they must have a balanced budget. There is no alternative to fiscal responsibility. As you look at Europe and what is happening in Europe or in the US or in Arab countries, there really is no alternative for, as an individual or as a country, there's no alternative to being fiscally responsible. So the path forward is to eliminate interest payments as a massive part of the budget and reformulate the budget in a way that doesn't hurt the poor and in a way that stops giving favors to the connected people from the regime, and as a result leaves the budget being able to be balanced without having to resort to foreign borrowing. Because this is really the main problem. If you get involved in foreign borrowing, it leads to puppet regimes that don't have the legitimacy in front of their people, as Mubarak and Ben Ali's regime are, and it also leads to a massive, giant drag on the economy as people continue to generate more and more and more money that goes simply towards paying off taxes to go towards paying off interest on the debt.
Right, Mubarak is gone, but now it's time to overthrow the real dictator, that being, of course, the IMF. Now, we've had the Arab Spring, and then we've had the Occupy Wall Street movement. Now a new movement is taking shape around the world. These are protesters who are protesting against SOPA and PIPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, and related intellectual property laws that are attacking the Internet from the corporate side. The corporatists want total control of the Internet. And is that a fair statement? Is this a case of the corporatists who are attacking the innovators, the entrepreneurs, and the free marketeers? Do you see this playing out as an extension, really, of this global insurrection?
Absolutely. I think it's what we're seeing with the Internet is very interesting because as markets in the real world continue to be strangled and controlled more and more by the managerial state, by governments all over the world, the Internet is really the place where the free market has gone. Because in the Internet, you can click anywhere you want, and you can decide to use any website you want, and people have the freedom of choice. And because they have the freedom of choice and their choices aren't enforced upon them, upon which website they should read, which website they should use for their email, they end up making these choices on the providers of these services that are, I would argue, better than what would happen if you had a central planner trying to dictate this to them under the pretext of some of the usual corporatist excuses. So because the Internet is a wonderful place where you can exchange all this information very freely, it leads to good information marketplace as well as a good example of a proper marketplace. What we're seeing with SOPA and PIPA is just a very strong attempt to try and bring in the power of the state from the real world onto the internet. And so now the failure and success of websites will not depend on whether people want to click on them and people want to view them, but the failure will depend on what some particular bureaucrat decides in some position of authority in the government. So this, of course, it would be very dangerous, from the perspective of the freedom of information, because what it does is it leaves the knowledge and the information that is available for members of society to be decided by particular people who get to know everything and then decide what you should be able to know. The optimistic thing about it is that the internet is just, it's a very resilient thing, and it's really hard to clamp down on international connectivity. And it was very encouraging what happened with SIPA and with PIPA and SOPA in terms of actually alerting a lot of people to the reality of the problems with the intellectual property paradigm. The problem is much deeper than just these two acts, which are probably going to die in Congress now. The problem really is in state enforcement of intellectual property, which serves in a very pernicious way. It harms both the artists who produce the art or the authors who publish the books, as well as the fans or the readers who want to consume this material. Neither of them really benefits from intellectual property laws. They go towards the middleman, basically. And what technology is allowing us is more and more ways to cut out the middleman, more and more ways for fans to communicate directly with the musicians they like to listen to or readers with their authors. And this cuts out the profit that middlemen can make. And so this is why this industry is trying to bring in the government in order to keep their old antiquated model so that they can continue to keep their job as the middleman. And they want the state to enforce that. That's exactly the definition of corporatism. And so you see people like Chris Dodd going on about, Hollywood creates jobs, or Hollywood is an important part of the U.S. economy. Well, obviously, it's a tiny part of the U.S. economy, and it's a tiny part of the world economy. And most importantly, it's very easy for them to find other business models that actually serve the artists rather than serve the old production industry that really is out of date and out of place today.
Okay, Saifedean Ammous, that's all the time we have on the Keiser Report. Thanks so much for being on.
Thanks, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Saifedean Ammous. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.